Doing very well.
I'll let you on that.
We're going through the That's why they make shotgun with all.
Yeah. I thought you was dark.
Where you are now. John, I won't go anywhere.
It went down.
All right.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
It should be an AM.
It should be the first part of the match as well. The first
Hey, Mike.
sliding 11:58 p.m. Should be.
Yeah, PM.
Hey, Mike.
Also, you notice,
You have a PM, that should be an AM on there, I think. Your first sighting.
also you have a Denver on the left and a Denver on the right for some reason.
See the first one, which is
That's right. There is a Denver in Utah now.
11:58 PM at the very bottom. You follow it up, it doesn't.
Yes, I do. You know, we're in the tornado warning.
This should be 11:58 a.m.
Yeah.
11:13.
Yeah, Jerry. Yes, I do. We're pretty close, you know.
Okay, we're
I don't know, I just have to call you when they walk in. Here they come, right now.
well, that's it for the briefing. Denver, Utah.
Here they come.
Good afternoon. The purpose of today's briefing is to provide you an update on the A-10 aircraft accident search and rescue effort from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona, which was declared missing at approximately 9 p.m. on April 2nd. Severe weather and adverse terrain in the area have complicated the search and rescue effort. So there's little additional information we have today, but we thought it would be useful to brief you on what we do know about the search and rescue effort. The Air Force has committed a large number of sophisticated resources to the search and rescue effort, to include U-2s assigned to Beale Air Force Base in Palmdale, California, and the EC-130 Airborne Battlefield Command and Control Center from Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona. Of course, the Civil Air Patrol and the National Guard have played a major role in the search operations. General Petersen will brief you shortly on the operation so far to date. Lieutenant General Frank Campbell, the 12th Air Force Commander at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, has been overseeing the search and rescue operation, and now that we have narrowed the search area, he is on the scene in Eagle County, Colorado, to assess the situation and to personally see how he can help in the search and rescue effort. General Campbell will have a press conference this afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern Time to bring you up to date on current activities. We'd like to thank Sheriff A.J. Johnson of Eagle County, Major General William Westerdahl, the Adjutant General of the State of Colorado, the Eagle County community, the Arizona and Colorado Air and Army National Guard, the Civil Air Patrol, and local law enforcement agencies for their efforts. I would now ask Major General Don Petersen, the Assistant Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Air and Space Operations, to brief you. Sir.
Thank you, Ron. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by taking us through kind of a chronological series of events leading up to where we are today from the start of this on the 2nd of April. As many of you may know, this aircraft was part of a three-ship formation which departed Davis-Monthan Airfield on an air-to-ground gunnery mission. They left at about 10:45 from Davis-Monthan. They refueled with a tanker prior to going onto the range. And after coming off the range at approximately 11:58 or so is when the aircraft was first missing. The three-ship formation was proceeding over toward the gunnery range at Gila Bend on the Barry Goldwater Range complex. As they approached the range, the formation took spacing. That is, they dropped back the number 2, number 3 man back approximately 6,000 feet in trail. This is to fly over a visual point, reference point, so they could update their navigation systems. and it's a common procedure as they enter the range. When they took the spacing here and then started into the range, shortly thereafter, there was no communication from the number 3 aircraft, Basin 1-3. They tried to contact Base 1-3, turned their flight to see if they could locate him visually, and they couldn't. So this was the first point at which the aircraft became missing. The flight itself immediately started to search in the local area there in an attempt to find the aircraft, but as I said, there was no radio contact with the pilot, and no radar contact initially because the transponder on the number 3 aircraft was turned off in accordance with our normal procedures. When we're in a formation, only the lead aircraft uses its transponder so that we don't have clutter and we're able to track the flight. FAA is better able to track the flight with more accuracy. And so the wingmen, both number 2 and 3, would normally have their transponder off. The flight, of course, reported this, began a search immediately in the area, and the wing began to marshal resources. And we had some a superb cooperation by the folks in the local area, not only the Civil Air Patrol, the reserves, the Arizona Air National Guard, and Army National Guard, sheriffs, deputies, rangers, police, and all the radar facilities, the airports. So they began a search not only in the area where they would expect if there were a malfunction with the airplane that would have could have possibly crashed, but also began to search all the airports in the area. And then as the search continued on, they asked for assistance from the Western Air Defense Sector radar to see if they would have any radar contacts from the flight and on the separation to see if there was a track. As I mentioned before, there was no transponder, but you could get raw radar information occasionally on a hit. The Air Defense Sector went back, took a look, and they actually did have a separate radar hit, not a transponder, moving in a northeasterly direction. The search continued in the local area here throughout the evening. The next day, the commander had a press conference and asked for support from the community as far as sightings, if we could report those. The search continued on. The weather was not very good in the area for on the 3rd and the 4th, the Thursday and Friday, though we had a number of aircraft, helicopters, etc., involved in the search in this area here. And going back and look at the radar data, we then asked, the commander had, during that period of time, asked not only the Western Air Defense Sector radar, but also Phoenix Approach Control, and subsequently Albuquerque Center, and then Denver Center, to go back and try to correlate any track they may have had in the area there that could possibly be a contact on the aircraft itself. Again, this would just be a raw radar data, no altitude information. And the only way you could correlate this was if you had some other information that could have been a light aircraft. There's a number of hits out there, light aircraft and other aircraft. But in doing so, they were able to pick up a couple of points from Western Air Defense Sector, which were in a northeasterly heading. They took this and projected that, gave it to information to Phoenix Approach, and they went back during the next couple of days. This was a continuous process as they looked through their tapes. On Thursday, as I mentioned, there was a press conference in which the public was requested to participate with any information they might have, and we began to get several visual sightings. The 2 hits that originally were left a course toward the northeast. We took that and extrapolated forward and asked the radar facilities to concentrate on a projected track that way because we had no other information, and we were trying to narrow the search in going back through the radar tapes. There were several sightings of an A-10 aircraft reported in the northeastern quadrant here, across Roosevelt Lake, Superstition Mountains, a number of reports in there. That was a concern to us, and when we began to get reports there, we began to expand the search out that way, away from the range and further into that area. There was a call in by a group of children who were enthusiasts who said they had seen an airplane, and they described it as coming around 12:20 up around Young, Colorado. We went back at that time to the Albuquerque Center and asked them to search in that specific area at that time, which allowed us to narrow that down and get some more accuracy. It turned out that right around 12:19, they had a contact that was basically in the area where the report had come about. So we had pretty good correlation between visual and radar track. I say track. In fact, these are intermittent radar contacts, so we didn't have a tracking. We would just have to extrapolate the data forward. This continued on with a number of sightings, as I mentioned, through the Superstition Mountains and on up, and we then took this data and extrapolated it based on the ground speed that we could compute from the different positions, used that data and extended that track on up this way. Albuquerque Center was participating now in the radar work, and they had several hits, as you can see, that moved up here. By late Friday and early Saturday, we had gotten information. The Denver Center, Albuquerque Center, everyone had come in, worked through the evening of the previous days to go through this large amount of radar information to see if we couldn't get better correlation as we move the track northeast. By Saturday, we felt with the sightings we had that we would begin to move the search area toward the Colorado because we had had a number of sightings en route along this pass here that also correlated with Denver Center radar. There were a number of sightings in the Montrose area here, visual sightings, all correlating with roughly this northeasterly path. Then as we got up here west of Aspen, there was a report here from a backpacker skier who was a pilot that he observed a A-10 aircraft come through what we would call a sucker hole or a break in the weather, somewhere around 15 to 17,000 feet, turning, and it proceeded back to the east. Taking that data again as a refinement, Denver Center then went through their tracks, and they were able to pick up several in that area at that time frame as they narrowed it down and got more precise data. And we had tracks that would take the airplane roughly up here to the north toward the Eagle Airport, and then back down south, still west of Aspen itself. And then the tracks begin to move to the northeast, the last track being at 140. Now, during this time, as I mentioned, we had also forwarded this information into Colorado and the press information in order to try to gain more sightings, and so we began to get a number of reports which facilitated this search. There were, as of last night, over 185 sorties that had been flown in support of the search and rescue, and again by everything from active duty Air Force to Air Force Reserve to National Guard, both Army and Air National Guard, Civil Air Patrol in both Arizona and Colorado. A number of aircraft were involved in the search, as well as hundreds of sightings, visual sighting reports, which were all pulled into the equation. I'd like to change this to a little bit larger scale if I could, Leo. This would be the track. I'm not sure if you can see this well enough, but this is where we came up in the larger track, the airplane. West of Aspen, Aspen would be over in this area here, is where we had that the report by the backpacker. The tracks then came down toward west again of Aspen, and then began to move back up in the northeasterly position. The tracks moved up into this wilderness area here near New York Mountain. Craig Peak is a point just southwest of the mountain that runs along here. The last radar track that we were able to get in that area occurred around 1:40 in the afternoon. At that time, we had a number of reports of explosion, noise, smoke, and again, the weather here was fairly marginal. In fact, it began to snow again on that afternoon, and we had broken to solid cloud decks in this area here. This is then where we've focused our search efforts, having the last point here. We also had gone back, the commander and the team at Davis-Monthan, and done a bit of work in trying to compute how long the airplane would have been able to fly with the available fuel, recognizing it had refueled and also knowing its approximate gas, because the flight normally checks in with that as they approach the range. So we knew that they would be pretty close. It turns out if we flew this path here and it averaged somewhere around 330 knots or so, which is what we could see as you move from point to point to point, the ground speed was around 330 knots. We would be very low on fuel by the time you got to this point here. Maybe 2.5 to 5 minutes worth of flying time we're estimating at that point. You can see the relationship of Eagle where the airport is here and Vail. So the site is about 12 to 15 miles southwest of Vail. If you could put the other one on here, Leo, please. That's local time. All the times here are local time. This is difficult, I know, and I apologize for it, but maybe afterward you'll want to come up and take a look at it because it's a relief map here. As I said, we had the vector coming up this way from the northeast. This is approximately where the last radar contact was. And this here is New York Mountain right along here. It's just underneath this line here.
What's the elevation?
Right here. The area is up to about 12.5 there. We have peaks in this area that hit close to 14,000.
Was he going in a direction that would take him toward the mountain?
The tracks were tracking this way here, but we're not sure whether he could have been on the backside. It could have turned, so we're not sure about that right now. But we used this here across Craig Peak along the New York Mountain Range right here. That's the area we're looking at. So we have taken that as the locus of our search effort and then expanded it out here to a larger area. But the focus has been right here. Now the search, as I mentioned, the bulk of the search activity was conducted on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and into Saturday in the area in Arizona, in particular through the mountains there and in the range area. But as we discovered correlation here, we began to move effort up here and start looking in this area here. When we did that, we brought in the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, which is based at Langley Air Force Base with the Air Combat Command. And they're responsible for doing search and rescue for the continental United States from the federal side. They participate in an average of about one a day, but that might be including a lost hiker, it could be a boat, it could be an aircraft. And they coordinate the effort. They then ask the on-scene commander to be established as the Colorado Civil Air Patrol, and the Civil Air Patrol is supported to do this mission. They have airplanes and participate in area searches as a primary responsibility of their mission. So the Eagle Airport right over here is where that effort is centered, and that is where the on-scene command is. That's the Colorado Civil Air Patrol. They have been well supported, as was mentioned earlier, by General Sconyers, by the sheriff, the local authorities, the Army National Guard of Colorado, and of course the Civil Air Patrol. We have flown a number of aircraft who flew this route from Davis-Monthan up and back, a number of aircraft in the area, overhead national assets. The U-2 has been up, so as I said, that's all a part of that 185 plus sorties involved in the effort. Today, the weather, as it has been in the last few days, is bad. In fact, this week has been bad in Colorado. Quite a bit of snow, low ceilings, and today we also have that problem, low ceilings down into the valleys. When we have had an opportunity to get airborne, the helicopters have been, in particular, of great help. But in many cases, we've been able to get partly way up the mountain, but had a ceiling across the peak, and we're restricted to getting to that area. So the search, though, continues around this locus right here. We look out to give you a little bit of a scale here. This is approximately 5 miles right here, so about 15 miles from here to here. So we've taken this out to look in this area here, but we are concentrating right now, as I said, within roughly about 20 miles of that center point.
There's been fresh snow?
There has been fresh snow, yes. Unfortunately, in the region, just in this week alone, there's been reports of 22 or 3 inches, and in some areas drifts. We've got 3 to 6 feet. So there's been wind in the area, and that obviously complicates our search activity.
Are we taking questions now, General?
Yes.
The aircraft had ordnance on board, we're told, 4 bombs. Could these have been armed aboard the aircraft? And or, if not, is there any way they could have gone off on impact?
The first part of that is yes, they could. That's how we arm them. In fact, they're safe on the ground. The pilot has to take a conscious action to arm the bombs themselves. And
Are they 400 pounds?
they were 500-pound bombs. If they are normally flown and safe until you're right over the target area where you're training on a cleared range, is the last thing you do is turn on the arming switch. And what they also must have a 4-second safe separation from the airplane. So even when they're armed, there's a delay in there to make sure it separates from the aircraft. There is 2 fuses on each one of the bombs. Both of them have to be armed in this case. And it's a positive system. In other words, if you do nothing, the bomb will not arm.
So the chances of it going off upon impact is just about 0, you say?
It would be very low. Very seldom do we have, in our experience has been when they're safe, even in a crash situation. There may be a part of the fire, but they're not explosive.
Sir, as you review the data,
Unless he'd armed them, presumably. I mean, if the pilot had chosen to arm them.
Yes, I'm answering the question as if they were safe and we would expect them to be.
General, can you tell us, what does this path that the pilot flew tell you? An experienced pilot who's flying in such a zigzag fashion, does that give you any indication of the demeanor of the pilot? Is he looking for something?
Well, that would be all speculation. It doesn't really tell us anything, except, our effort here is trying to correlate where we might be able to locate the pilot in the aircraft.
But does it tell you that the pilot is actually flying the aircraft, that he's not
in regard to that,
incapacitated?
yes, we think that it probably was because, for a couple of reasons. There was visual sightings of the airplane turning, which would, you would assume to be under control. The airplane does have an autopilot, but it doesn't have a terrain following radar, and so when you get into higher altitudes, you would have to, obviously, if you were not above the highest altitude in the area, you would have to have some control.
So you think that he was conscious and at the controls flying the plane?
Well, I would make that assumption that to go that far.
What about going down through the sucker hole?
Well, that's what I was saying. So we think that, that's another instance, several turns along the way, coming down through the sucker hole, heading back east. So whether, he was fully under control or not, I couldn't speculate, but we do believe that the airplane was not flying itself.
So is there anything that you have found out about him, his background, his personal life, which would tell you that he had had any crises in his life, personal crises in his life recently, that might have prompted him to take what is a bizarre action?
I don't know about his personal life, other than I can tell you he was well qualified. He'd been doing good in the program. He was an instructor pilot in T-37s at Laughlin Air Force Base, had about over 1,900 flying hours, was a check pilot there. Had a check ride at Davis-Monthan where it was qualification level 1 with no downgrades, which is a high rating. And his commander at Laughlin Air Force Base had rated him above average. And as far as a personal issue, as you mentioned, I can't speak to anything that would say that he.
General, as you look at this, you look at the track that this pilot took, acknowledging that it appears he was flying the craft. And knowing his background, because investigations have been underway, is there anything in this search area or within the vicinity, if we drew a larger circle around here, that would draw your interest as to why he might have flown in that direction to that area?
Not really. This is a fairly desolate area through southwestern Colorado on up. There are a number of small towns, and this is, as I said, is a wilderness area. There's very I can't think personally of anything that would correlate to why you would fly in that particular area.
In his past that you found that might have this as an attractive area. I mean, there are indications, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but there are indications that this young man did have some kind of emotional trauma recently and that suicide is not out of the question. If he chose to do that, I know we're getting into conjecture, but was there something specific about this area that you found?
No, he had flown to Colorado before on cross countries, maybe a third of the cross countries in the last year. That's not unusual from where he was based to go to New Mexico, Colorado, Oklahoma from his Texas base, but not anything there. And really our focus is right now for the Air Force and all the people that are participating in this is to locate the pilot.
Any
family locations in the area?
Just one second. I go back to the bombs for a second. You said you don't believe they were armed. But again, if suicide were contemplated here, it would not be unrealistic for someone in an emotional state to arm the bombs. Then would they have gone off, perhaps, upon impact?
If the bombs were armed, they would have gone off. You would expect them to go off. I would not speculate on that. Normally, you would expect the bombs to be safe. There would be no reason for us to believe that the bombs would be armed.
General, you've obviously talked to
family in the area around Denver. Have you found that out, or in the area where the plane went down?
Not that, to my knowledge. I know his family lives in New York, and that's the only information I have.
Well, I have your attention. Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Has the weather prevented you from looking into any prime grids in that area where you think it'd be? I know the weather's bad and you've looked, but are there areas that would be
yes,
really?
there are still areas that we're searching. As I mentioned, we've been able to do some pretty good work in the northern sector here, and intermittently around the area, and expand it out. But there's still much area there that we need to look at.
What are the beacons that you'd normally be able to tune in on in a search like this that aren't operating for whatever reason, and why might they not be operating?
In most of our fighter aircraft, like the A-10, the beacon is not with the airplane, but it's in the ejection seat, because normally we will eject, and it's activated when you eject so that you can locate the pilot. Based on altitude and all that, you may eject, and the wreckage could be some way from you. So in an effort to make sure we could find the pilot location first, the beacon is with the airplane, and it's automatic now. So if you were to crash the airplane, your beacon may not go off.
Can the beacon be turned off by the pilot?
The beacon can be selected to be manually turned off, but the normal procedure for us is to fly with it in the automatic or on position.
Isn't that pattern of the plane going up and down, back and forth around, isn't that the pattern of someone looking for a place to land? Or
well, it's not too far from an airport at Eagle, and not too far from Aspen, but other than that, I don't know what was happening at the time. So
Have you been carrying any maps with him that would have shown him where a potential landing place might have been, or should he have, by those cross-country flights, known?
He would have normally had maps, and I suspect they would have gone up there. They would have been more like air route charts. The maps that he would be most concerned with on your mission is you take the maps for the area that you're going to fly in.
Right, but given the training and the instructor status that he had, wasn't that a way for him to teach other pilots how to land on private airstrips and that sort of thing? So would he have been familiar with this area?
No, we don't practice landing on private airstrips.
Given his background,
Are there any? What are the safeguards that exist for preventing somebody from just breaking off a formation and flying off on his own? I mean, is there any positive control mechanism that you have?
Well, I normally, this is a little bit abnormal. You normally have the flight in sight. The airplane is in trail, so I mean they're not special safeguards. We don't plan on that being a problem.
General, did this pilot have any background or training that you're aware of in mountain aviation?
I'm not aware of any.
General, two questions. You mentioned that he didn't have terrain following apparatus, although he did have an autopilot. Other than what the backpacker saw, that is him coming out of the car, is there any evidence that he did change height during his run?
The report was that he was descending through what we would call a sucker hole or a break in the cloud, so I would assume that he was coming in a descent through that hole, so that would have been a descent or change in altitude.
Any other evidence of a change in altitude during the long flight?
Back in the earlier parts, eyewitnesses talked about seeing the airplane low and then a little bit higher, so there was no correlation with a level flight path.
And secondly, while you were trying to find out where he was effort made to contact him on the radio? Should he have?
Oh yes, immediately. That was the first, and that was the first. So we had no communication with him verbally on the radio nor with radar contact, but that was the first indication that he was missing, is when they tried to check again.
So either his radio broke down or he was deliberately not answering.
I couldn't speculate, but that it could be either one of those. We
General,
just had no radio contact.
Today there's a specific news report quoting unnamed Air Force investigators that the pilot was distraught because his mother had recently visited him and announced that she had changed her religion to Jehovah's Witness. Can you shed any light on this?
Well, I'll tell you, we're concerned about the pilot, and we're concerned about his family. This is where our focus is. I wouldn't speculate on family affairs here. I'll only talk about the search and rescue. This is, I guess, we're all a little bit emotional about this. This is a fellow pilot, a member of our Air Force. We're very concerned about finding the pilot, and I appreciate your interest in speculation. But quite honestly, our job right now.
Away from that? Would you say that's not the case?
No, I wouldn't comment either way on it. What I would say is that we are interested in finding the pilot first of all and his airplane, and that's where our full efforts are right now.
General, after nearly 2 weeks, surely you have interviewed with family members and his comrades and other people to ask them about this. You're not putting that off.
Yes, we've talked to friends. Family, but in the context of the search and rescue, what could we find out that might help us lead to find it? We have not found this pilot, and we have not found his airplane, and that's where our focus is. That's where our questions are.
You have no information about why he might have taken this action?
No, I cannot say why he would have taken this action, and unfortunately, we may never know that answer.
What have you learned from the interviews from the family members and people in his squadron and everybody you're talking to about him? What have you learned about him? Have you learned anything about him with safety?
Yes, he's considered to be, as I mentioned earlier, an excellent aviator, outgoing. There's, as I mentioned before, his commander at Laughlin Air Force Base said he was above average, and I mentioned he's performed well in the squadron there. So I have no personal. There's not some track here that pops up to us.
There's no vignette that comes through this whole thing that says maybe this guy's on the wrong path here.
No.
To help us understand this, can you tell us whether or not...
Fairly mature pilot, 32 years old.
Can you tell us whether or not he was undergoing any counseling for any reason?
No, I can't, and I have no reason to believe it was.
General, this has given a lot of rise to conspiracy activists calling around. Did it have something to do with the trial in Denver or with the anniversary of the blast there? Have you looked into any of that? Because they are getting calls in some of the senator's office.
We have not looked into that, as I mentioned before. I don't have any personal feelings about that. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, as we all are, in finding the pilot and finding the airplane.
The runways at Aspen and at Angel sufficiently long to handle an A-10 on an approach, even loaded with ordnance?
Yes, I think you could say at Eagle or Aspen, we have small aircraft.
Was there any indication that he attempted to communicate with anyone during the process of this by using a transponder, by flying triangles, the old emergency patterns? Any indication of any of the radar tracks?
No, sir. From everything we can take, there was no, we unfortunately have no radio communication with him. We had no active transponder, and so all we really have to go along is the combination of those inactive tracks or the radar hits and the visual sightings. And that's very frustrating.
General, I haven't had a chance yet. Do you see it? Do you see it any significance at all to the fact that the plane crashed with only 2 to 3 minutes of estimated fuel on board?
No. I mean, it's hard to say. It could have been less than that. It could have flamed out. At that point, it was very close to a very low fuel state. So. I can't correlate that to anything. It was a matter of, as I said, probably 2 to 5 minutes is what we're guessing at from that flight path of fuel.
And
Let Mark finish.
A follow-up is, in the gun of this plane, there is rounds that contain depleted uranium. Is there any threat to people or the environment if any of these shells break open?
Well, these were target practice, so they weren't live rounds. There is concern. As I said, the bombs were safe. We're concerned about people on the ground and the search as well. And I would just add, while we have this opportunity to make the point, if anyone sees anything that that might be a case where the airplane could be down, to stay away and advise the
Safe, right?
Pardon?
You don't know the bombs were safe, you said.
No, I say we would expect them to be safe. There's no reason why they wouldn't be safe at this point. I have nothing to believe that they would.
Any reason at all to believe that this plane could be anywhere but the area you've just described? And have you said definitively that you think it crashed?
No, we haven't said definitively we think it's crashed, but you can see from our plot, we're concerned about it being down here. We have no reason to believe that it's outside of this area anywhere else.
General, you've talked about the
we're not ruling out anything, of course, but we're going with what we have available to us right now.
the radar and how you were able to piece it together using relationships of where other planes were at the times of the sightings. Have you been able to determine the altitude at times during this flight that led to the area where you're searching?
Just with the few visual sightings that I mentioned before, there were some visual sightings that mentioned the airplane being low down in Arizona, and then the visual sighting I mentioned earlier coming through the 15 to 17,000 feet. We know that it was clear of the Superstition Mountains, and so 6,000 or 7,000 feet in that area.
What does that tell you, flying at that elevation?
It tells you that the airplane, we suspect the airplane was not just cruising on its own, on altitude hold or something.
Given the weather in the area and the conditions that there are now, isn't it likely that you may not find this airplane until for months before the snow?
Well, we hope that's not the case, but it is very complicated by the weather, as you said, and the snow itself.
Is there any chance he could still be alive?
Yes, there is. And we hope that's the case. Our pilots are trained in survival training. We don't know, whether he got out of the airplane or not.
General, you're wearing command pilot wings. I don't know if you flew the A-10, but could it be by his track that you described for us that he was searching for either the Eagle Field or the Aspen Field to make an approach and landing? Would those tracks have been in any way compatible with that?
Well, that's a possibility. As I said, the flight path takes us, this is, of course, a smaller piece of the map, takes us up toward Eagle and then comes back down toward Aspen before it turns back and moves into this area here.
And both those fields were long enough just to understand you
Eagle
correctly.
is a normal
The last
commercial
radar
field.
hit you got was from Denver approach, or what?
Pardon?
The last
Denver radar, yes.
You would think one of the best sightings was that smoke, but obviously you haven't been able just to go back where the skiers saw the smoke.
Well, that's what's been helpful to us in a correlation, but we had about 20 different reports, and so there's some variance in the location itself. And this is a very rugged area, as I mentioned. If you look at it, the terrain is very sharp in here along that mountain, so you could be on either side, you could be in a valley. It's very difficult in searching this area here, a number of tight canyons.
Could you give us some historical perspective? How many times have planes gone down? Air Force hasn't found them. I would assume there are some cases.
In looking back at that, I think in the last 28 years we had about 25 airplanes that took more than a day before we found, and I think only about 2 that were over a week. But this is we have had airplanes. We had an airplane in Panama that was a single aircraft on its own that we lost, and there was no one with it, and in the jungle area, unable to recover the airplane.
General, this is entirely consistent with this pilot having left the formation deliberately, flown all that distance deliberately, and there's nothing here that suggests an equipment malfunction or there were plenty of other places that he could have diverted to, plenty of communications available to him to find a safe place to land. Is that not right? It looks like he did this deliberately.
Well, again, that's difficult to speculate on because there were weather there. We had no radio contact, so we don't know what the status of his...
Flew over a period of an hour, and
well, we think, as I said before, we don't think the airplane was on the autopilot. He was probably flying it, but what his intentions were, we couldn't say. We don't know whether he had lost navigation aids. We really don't know.
General, was weather along most of his track bad or good or?
Intermittent. And the first part down toward the range here in around Tucson, in between Tucson and Phoenix, not bad weather, but then it began to get scattered and broken as it got on past the Superstition
Radio,
Mountains.
he should have returned to Davis Mountain, right? That would have been logical. Probably CAVU weather, CFR weather.
That's possible. Yes, sir.
Could that plane have lost all its navigation aids, beacons, transponders, radio, everything in one?
It's possible with electrical failure, complete, but you know, I don't know.
Did you ever have,
You can fly without electrical power with your battery alone.
before you lost radio contact, indicates to me that there was radio contact with him from the point of takeoff until?
Yes, the flight was operating normally as they were proceeding through the refueling and onto the range. It was just as they were approaching the range when they split up to take their space.
We'll get back to some of these reports of smoke. Getting back to some of these smoke reports, you said there were a lot of people reporting smoke. Also, according to one news report, there were people who heard loud explosions, loud booms. Can you confirm that? Is that consistent with bombs going off,
or it could be an aircraft crash, either one. And there were reports, as you said, not only of smoke, but we had reports of noise as well.
We have time for one more question.
General,
What was his last words? That he spoke with the controllers or his?
I'm sorry, but I don't know that. I just want to say that we appreciate the tremendous contribution that the folks have given in this search, and that we would encourage any citizens out there to report anything they might see that might help in this. And again, if you cite something that appears to be an aircraft sighting damage or something like that, that you stay clear of it and report to the authorities. But our primary concern and our goal here right now is to find the pilot and find the airplane. This is a search and rescue mission, and that's where we're going to keep our focus.
Is anybody trying to get up in there on the ground right now, so it's just a snowmobile?
No.
Good afternoon. Let me start with a few introductions. First of all, I'd like to welcome 10 Russian journalists to the briefing. These are editors-in-chief or management executives of newspapers throughout the Russian Federation, and they are here looking at the business of journalism during a 3-week trip around the United States. We also have 17 journalism students from the American University School of Communication. They're here to learn about the coverage facilities and the process that results in our news briefing. They're led by Assistant Professor Sean Kelly, himself a former Pentagon correspondent. The students are from colleges and universities around the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, and they're all spending a semester at American University learning how journalism is practiced in Washington, D.C. I hope to have an opportunity to talk to some of the journalists who are here also. I would also like to welcome Joy Kurtz and her husband, Scott. Neither Scott nor Joy is a stranger to these kinds of proceedings. Joy is a producer for WFTV, an ABC affiliate in Orlando, Florida, and Scott is a cameraman there. On the announcement side, Dr. Bernard Rosker, who is the Special Assistant for Gulf War Illnesses, will go on a 9-city town hall tour starting on Sunday in Cleveland, Ohio. This is being done to address the concerns of Gulf War veterans across the country. And the tour is sponsored by the Veterans of Foreign War and American Legion. These are informational forums that are going to be held from 7 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. in each one of the cities' local time. And there is a blue top which has been distributed, which has all the dates and locations which you can refer to if you're interested in following up on that. Those of you who are here and anybody who is in the building is welcome to attend a teleconference this afternoon in the video teleconference facility in the Army Operations Center. This will be at 3:30. Major General James Hill of the U.S. Army Forces Command and Major General John Costello, who's the commanding general of Fort Bliss, are going to provide a briefing and answer questions on exercise Roving Sands 97, which kicks off tomorrow. This is one of the largest exercises we conduct in the United States. It involves more than 20,000 service members from all branches of the armed forces and 3 allied nations. They use facilities in military installations and training ranges throughout Texas and Mexico for that exercise. For those of you who are going to attend the briefing, meet in room 2E641 at 3:15, and the Army will provide an escort to see that you get to the video teleconference facility. And with that, I'd be happy to try and answer some of your questions. Yes, Charlie.
Mike, now that the Marines have taken over in Brazzaville, have there been any changes? Has Nassau moved any closer? Could you fill us in on that?
There are no changes other than the one you mentioned, and let me just go through that a little bit. Marine Corps Brigadier General Guy van der Linden took over command of the Joint Task Force, which is located at Brazzaville in Congo. He took control of the operation from the Army, which had been operating there since we deployed to the region. We have, as you are aware, Charlie, and others, that we have a Special Marine Air-Ground Task Force, which is on scene and embarked in USS Nassau, operating off the coast of Zaire. The actual location of the ship is about the same as it's been, and they are still in a very watchful and prepared mode, ready to help out if required. But at this point, there has been no request for any kind of evacuations that would involve the Marines. We have, at this point, slightly over 200 military personnel in Brazzaville. We have just under 60 who are located in Libreville. And we've got a couple of people who are located in Kinshasa for the purpose of communications and support from that side. But right now they're just watching and waiting. Yes, Suzanne.
When is the swap out with the Kearsarge supposed to take place?
Well, I think that you probably have seen the release that was put out. It actually is Kearsarge is scheduled to depart from Norfolk, Virginia today to relieve Nassau. That will be sometime later this month, and embarked in Kearsarge is the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. On board USS Nassau is the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit.
New subject?
Yes.
Can you tell us when the Secretary will receive the record report from the Air Force, and when we might expect that the Secretary will make some sort of decision about the report's recommendation that no one be punished for the lapses of security at Saudi Arabia?
The The time frame on this is that the actual report on the investigation into the bombing at Khobar Towers was transmitted to the office of the Secretary yesterday. Now, the report itself is quite extensive, lots of supporting documents, footnotes, that sort of thing. And I don't have any timeline that I can share with you at this point on how long a review will take place before it actually moves to the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary. But it has been formally transferred to the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
Last time it was formally transmitted to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, it was, we were told by the briefer at this podium that it was returned and told that it needed more work. Does the Office of the Secretary of Defense now consider the report complete?
The office has not yet had an opportunity to review this very extensive report, and until that occurs, I can't tell you what the outcome will be.
Can we turn briefly to the search for the missing A-10 in Colorado? At their briefing out there this morning, they said that a team had been assembled to take a fresh look at the evidence, I gather, all the way across the board. Can you tell us what the fresh look team is doing and why that is necessary if you have a good team on it?
I actually have no further information for you on that. The search is being conducted and coordinated by the Air Force from Colorado, and although I've seen those reports, I don't have any further insights into any kind of a fresh approach.
Mike, do you have any kind of estimate on cost so far for the search at this point?
No, I don't. I know that there are several different agencies involved in the search, but as you probably imagine, the cost is not at this juncture our primary concern. Our primary concern is to try and find the pilot and to locate the aircraft if possible.
Has anybody said that they're going to put an end date to this thing, or just is there a point when
No,
they're going to wait till the snow melts?
There's certainly no end date. I think that the search will continue as long as there's some hope that we'll find something, as long as technology allows us to search in any kind of a coordinated way, and how long that will be, I can't say.
Mike, you say that since you say you have no new information, does that mean that this team that is being assembled is not a DoD team, it's an Air Force team?
Well, it's an Air Force team. We receive reports from time to time on through the Air Force on how the search is going, but as I say, I don't have any insights in it, any kind of change in their approach that they've made out there.
You say as long as technology allows us to have some hope that something may be found. Technology is being fairly roundly defeated by the quantity of snow and the ruggedness of the terrain. Is it not at this point?
Well, I think that technology has been applied very effectively in this case. If you were here for the briefing that was given last week by the Air Force and how they're progressing on this, it was only through a very careful analysis and through the interviews that the Air Force has had with people who may have seen something that they constructed a fairly tight area where the aircraft may have crashed. As a result of that, they've been able to pinpoint the search in a fairly confined area. They've certainly used aviation technology in a variety of forms, including helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, SR-71s, U-2s. They've used photo intelligence to locate anything that would add to their ability to pinpoint the area where the aircraft might be. It is true at this point they've not found the aircraft, but as I say, I think they want to continue as long as they have anything that would indicate to them where they could look productively.
How common is it for the Air Force or any of the services not to be able to find a plane in a crash like this?
It's very unusual. I think that the Air Force can provide you some specifics on that, but it is quite unusual for an aircraft to go missing more than 24 hours. And in this case, we're about to reach the 2-week point. Charlie?
Change the subject.
Yes.
Is the B-2 flying again, and is there any analysis of what happened or fix on it?
Excuse me?
Is the B-2 flying again, and is there any analysis?
The B-2 is, I believe, is flying again, and it appears that it was simply a problem with a single aircraft. I may have said something earlier, and I may have incorrectly identified the locations where this exercise is going to take place. It is Texas and New Mexico. If anyone misunderstood me, please, I stand corrected. Just 1 second, Bill.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to share one thing. On the briefing at the Army's Operations Center, the video teleconference, is that available for videotape recording?
Is there anybody from the Army who can enlighten me on that? We'll try and find out while we're here. Right. Okay.
On
Bill.
the Aberdeen trials, referring specifically to Elaine Scalino's article in the New York Times, witnessing, I believe, testimony yesterday and Friday. What is the Department of Defense reaction to this appalling, I believe, appalling revelations that are coming out of this trial? And then I have a follow-up. Do you have a reaction?
Bill, I think you know that because this is a trial in progress, we're very restricted in what we can say regarding the judicial proceedings that are going on. I think that the statements earlier, which have been made by various officials of the department in a very generalized sense, are a matter of record, and we'd be very happy to provide them to you.
Do you think that the chain of command broke down at Aberdeen and strict rules of social behavior between the sexes were broken? And what is the military doing to keep blackmail, keep this imposed silence from let's say, happening again on a base where people are being abused?
Well, I think as we talked last week, there is an Army review of this entire situation that is expected to be presented to the Secretary of the Army later this year, sometime this summer, which will address many of the problems which have been identified so far. But in addition to that, I want to remind you that there are procedures set up in every location, every unit, every command that I'm aware of for hotline calls to various officials, so that if there are problems that can't be worked through the chain of command, there is an approach that individuals can take to surface these problems. Certainly, the history of the U.S. military is one that depends very heavily on the chain of command, and when the chain of command operates appropriately, is an extremely effective way of managing people and managing problems and solving problems.
Finally, let me ask, can a trainee recruit under the control of a sergeant be assured that a higher up in the chain of command will protect them if they tell the truth?
I think the Army is looking at this whole matter. They have taken steps to ensure that a system exists which will indeed protect recruits, as every branch of the service does.
Thank you.
Just one question. It's a published report that China was preparing to deploy a new class of long-range missiles that could reach Japan and Korea. Can you confirm whether that's the case or not, or is that something the United States is looking into or is concerned about?
North Korea.
I'm sorry, North Korea. I resubmit my question.
China's got them.
Personally incorrect.
Comment on the reports that North Korea is preparing to field a new generation of long-range missiles that could reach South Korea and Japan.
Maybe China.
Well, I certainly am aware of the report, but I'm not in a position to discuss intelligence matters. I do want to point out, however, that we monitor very closely the developments in ballistic missile programs such as this one very closely. We've done that for many years. We'll continue to do that kind of monitoring. We're very concerned about the development and possible deployment or export of such missiles. And I also want to point out that there are talks which are scheduled to take place next month in New York City regarding North Korean missile-related activities.
Mike, one other quick question on Panama. With this officer who was charged with negligent homicide after allegedly made one of his subordinates go on a run that later died of apparently of heat stroke. Do you have anything on that?
I don't have any further details. I've, of course, seen that release that was put out by the folks down there in Panama, but I don't have details beyond that.
Thank you.
Okay.